Welcome. I'm Michelle Woods. I'm the Vice President and Director of RAND's Homeland Security Research Division, which operates the Homeland Security Operational Analysis Center, a federally funded research and development center operated on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security. First, a few housekeeping items before we begin. I want to remind everybody that this webinar is being recorded. We are planning to have time for a short question and answer session at the end. And if you have questions about the presentation and research, please post them in the Q&A forum below. One note of importance, we will not be talking and asking questions on the actions the new administration may take in the future with respect to this topic. We'll post links relevant to today's presentation in the chat below as well. Okay, on to today's webinar. This is the fourth presentation in a special series of RAND Policy Labs called The Rise of AI. RAND experts are studying the implications of artificial intelligence across nearly every policy domain, and this is your opportunity to hear directly from our researchers. Each day, researchers and staff from across RAND are bringing both deep institutional knowledge and high-quality intersectional research capabilities to help society meet the threats and assess the opportunities posed by AI and machine learning. I am proud to introduce two such researchers who will share more about how the Department of Homeland Security uses artificial intelligence, the public perceptions about AI applications, and how AI impacts the Homeland Security enterprise more broadly. So joining us today, we have Douglas Young. He is an Associate Director of the Management, Technology, and Capabilities Program within RAND's Homeland Security Research Division. Doug is a Senior Behavioral and Social Scientist at RAND and a Professor of Policy Analysis at the Pardee RAND Graduate School. His work has explored how policymakers can use insights from emerging technologies for well-being and civic policymaking. Joining him is Benjamin Bourgeau. He is a policy researcher at RAND and professor at the Pardee RAND Graduate School as well, working at the intersection of ethics, emerging technology, and human security. His current research focuses on the ethics of artificial intelligence-based technologies, including issues related to AI governance, catastrophic risk, and surveillance. Doug, Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and hello all. I'm excited to discuss this topic. So in this talk, we'll be discussing the ways DHS has been using AI, as well as the importance of public perception surrounding the use of these technologies. And of course, this is an extremely large policy area and a very rapidly moving technology space. So we're not going to be able to be comprehensive here today, but we do hope to give you an introduction to the topic and a sense of its importance today and moving forward into the future. So briefly, here's our agenda. So first, we'll lay out some basic background on AI and DHS to provide some shared understanding. We'll note how DHS sees the benefits of AI for its Homeland Security missions. And we'll also talk about how the widespread use of AI presents new challenges that DHS needs to take seriously. But our primary focus here today will be on the sort of risks that come from DHS, or really any government agency, using AI, including risks to American civil liberties. And we'll highlight the importance of the diverse members of the public's views and attitudes about these risks. Next slide, please. So I want to start by defining our terms. What is AI? It turns out that AI is very hard to define. The definition represents a moving target and has evolved as technology has evolved. So what was considered AI in the 1950s differs greatly from the technologies we think of as AI as today. And it really involves a broad set of technologies, from narrow task-specific tools to so-called artificial and hypothetical general intelligence. So it's hard to draw clear boundaries. And moreover, the development of AI prompts us to question fundamental aspects of intelligence that we really don't understand even in humans. So instead of a sharp definition, we'll provide some examples that hopefully resonate. So AI includes the facial recognition technology, used on our phones, and increasingly by government and private companies to quickly identify people, like in airports. It also includes large language models, such as ChatGPT, and now, if you've been following the news, DeepSeek's R1. We've seen just exponential improvement over the past few years, and many of these large language models now do better than humans across many tests. It's really like pretty head-spinning how quickly these systems have improved. AI today also includes generative AI that creates audio, pictures, video, such as DALL-E or Stable Diffusion. And I think AI also includes the algorithmic feeds on social media that captivate our attention and drive us for further engagement. And lastly, AI is often now and increasingly integrated into robotics, such as the autonomous robot dogs developed by Boston Dynamics. So I think all of these are examples of AI. Next slide, please. So that's AI. What is the Department of Homeland Security, DHS? Well, DHS was established after the September 11th attacks. It brought together over 20 different agencies under a single department with a huge mission, safeguarding the American homeland. Today, DHS operates across a broad spectrum of domains. So, for instance, DHS handles border security, and TSA officers at airports screen nearly 2 million passengers every day. DHS screens cargo vessels and does maritime security through the Coast Guard. And beyond physical security, DHS leads the federal government in cybersecurity, protecting critical infrastructure and government networks from attacks. And when the US faces a disaster, whether it's a hurricane, a wildfire, or emergency, FEMA has the responsibility to coordinate response efforts and provide support to affected communities. This diverse portfolio and pretty huge responsibility makes DHS pretty unique. The department must simultaneously protect physical and cybersecurity while ensuring they also protect civil liberties and Americans' freedoms. And achieving these multiple complex goals becomes even more critical as they integrate new technologies like AI. Next slide, please. So some believe that AI offers transformative potential across DHS's mission space. So for screening and inspection, AI systems can quickly analyze the X-ray images of cargo containers and luggage to flag potential threats while speeding legitimate shipments through. In cyberspace, AI systems are really good at detecting patterns that could indicate emerging threats and analyzing network traffic to identify intrusions. In counter-drone operations, AI might allow automated detection and tracking of unauthorized drones. And large language models like ChatGPT may be able to help analyze the massive amounts of text data, from analyzing social media posts for threats to processing immigration documents across many different languages. So pattern recognition algorithms help DHS identify suspicious financial transactions that might indicate criminal activity. And during natural disasters, AI helps DHS process satellite imagery to rapidly assess damage to direct emergency response. So these systems might be able to protect flood patterns or track wildfire spread and help emergency managers deploy resources where they're needed most. So AI is potentially at least a tool that can greatly enhance DHS missions and make them more effective. Next slide, please. So DHS has taken steps towards transparency in its AI use. Most notably, DHS maintains and publishes an AI use case inventory, cataloging how different components within the department are using it. The inventory provides information about AI applications across components like CBP, FEMA, TSA, and others. And for each use case, the public can learn about the specific technology being employed, its intended purpose, and the component responsible for its deployment. This transparency provides some foundation for discussion about the benefits and risks of these technologies. Next slide. So as we see, AI offers capabilities that could enhance Homeland Security missions. However, organizations like DHS face a dual challenge when it comes to AI. Like many institutions, they must prepare for threats that sophisticated AI systems might pose to security. But also important, as Homeland Security agencies deploy AI, they must carefully consider the risks that come with using these powerful tools. These include questions of accuracy, fairness, transparency, and maintaining appropriate human oversight in critical decisions. As public safety organizations with law enforcement authority, DHS, I think, has a special responsibility to examine these risks thoroughly. Next slide, please. There are several significant risks regarding DHS use of AI that demand our attention. First, There are serious concerns about bias and unfairness in AI systems. These technologies reflect the biases present in their training data, which could lead to discriminatory outcomes in critical areas like screening or law enforcement decisions. And this is particularly concerning, I think, given DHS's interactions with diverse populations. Privacy and civil liberties represent another major area of concern. AI systems often require vast amounts of data to function effectively. And so when these systems are deployed for surveillance or social media monitoring, they may collect and analyze the personal information of Americans at an unprecedented scale. This raises important questions about how data is retained, how it is used, and implications for individual privacy rights. The deployment of AI systems for monitoring could also create a chilling effect on free expression. If people believe they're under constant AI surveillance, they might self-censor or alter their legitimate behavior. This could particularly impact already marginalized communities and potentially undermine First Amendment rights. Finally, there are challenges around oversight and accountability. AI systems are usually developed by for-profit companies and sold to the government. The technologies themselves can be complex and opaque, making it difficult for oversight bodies or the public at large to understand how they work and their impact. And so this black box nature of many AI systems raises questions about due process rights, especially when these technologies inform decisions that affect individual rights or liberties. So it's really crucial to ensure that while we pursue the benefits of AI for Homeland Security, we don't inadvertently undermine the very rights and values that we're trying to protect. Next slide, please. The concerns about AI aren't merely theoretical. Recent history shows us several cases where government agencies had to reverse course on technology deployments due to public backlash. One notable example was the Pentagon's Total Information Awareness Program after 9/11. This program tried to collect and analyze vast amounts of personal data, including financial data, medical data, and communications records across the country and the globe, in order to identify potential terrorist activities. The scope and invasiveness of this surveillance program sparked intense public opposition, leading Congress actually to defund it soon after it was released in 2003. Similarly, DHS faced significant pushback over its deployment of advanced screening technology at airports. You might remember these. DHS had deployed full-body scanners that essentially created detailed images of passengers, showing their full bodies to agents. And the public outcry about this was so strong that TSA had to remove those scanners. And more recently, we've seen similar reactions to facial recognition technology. The IRS had to abandon plans to require facial recognition for accessing tax records online after widespread criticism from privacy advocates and members of Congress. So these examples demonstrate that when government moves too quickly to deploy powerful technologies without adequately addressing privacy and civil liberties concerns upfront, they often face public resistance. And I think that history offers important lessons for today. Next slide, please. A variety of stakeholders have raised concern about DHS's use of AI. In Congress, both Democratic and Republican lawmakers have expressed reservations. For instance, members of the House Homeland Security Committee have demanded greater transparency about facial recognition deployments in airports and have questioned the accuracy and fairness of AI screening systems. State and local governments have also pushed back against certain federal AI deployments. Several states even have passed laws restricting facial recognition use by law enforcement, while some cities have banned it entirely. And this has created challenges for DHS programs that really rely on cooperation with local officials. Civil liberties organizations have been particularly vocal critics. Groups like the ACLU and the Electronic Frontier Foundation have consistently challenged DHS's AI initiatives. These groups have highlighted concerns about surveillance programs and automated risk assessment tools, arguing that they threaten privacy rights and disproportionately impact marginalized communities. And even technologies themselves sometimes have raised red flags. Several AI companies have declined to bid on certain DHS contracts, citing ethical concerns about potential misuse of their technology. So these stakeholder concerns underscore the importance of engaging in meaningful dialogue about how to deploy AI responsibly in these Homeland Security missions, and the importance, again, of protecting civil rights and liberties in those deployments. Next slide, please. Understanding and actively managing public perception is crucial for the successful deployment of AI. When DHS fails to adequately consider public sentiment, it risks not only project failure, but also public mistrust. Public perception serves as like a critical early warning system. By measuring public trust and perceived legitimacy before deployment, DHS can identify potential challenges and adjust course. Being proactive is more cost-effective than having to terminate or modify programs after implementation. Moreover, public support is essential for securing congressional funding. When the public understands and accepts the value of new technologies, their representatives are more likely to provide necessary resources and appropriate oversight. Public perception also directly impacts operational effectiveness through partnerships. DHS relies really heavily on cooperation with state and local agencies, private sector entities, and the general public at large. When communities trust and understand AI deployments, they're more likely to cooperate with DHS programs and share important information. Conversely, distrust can lead to less cooperation. And we shouldn't overlook the impact on DHS personnel either. Staff morale and effectiveness can suffer when employees feel they're implementing programs that lack public support or raise ethical concerns. This can affect recruitment, can affect retention, and day-to-day performance. So by studying public perceptions, especially among specific communities most affected by these technologies, DHS can take preventative steps to address concerns before they become obstacles. Importantly, public perception isn't something you measure once and forget. It requires ongoing assessment through a technology's life cycle. And this continuous feedback loop allows for timely adjustments and help maintain public trust. I'll turn it over to Doug now to get a bit more detailed about the public perception research that we've done here at RAND and other work that we'd like to do going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So DHS understands the importance of public perceptions, like you just heard from Ben, and asked RAND to find out what Americans thought about DHS's use of AI technologies and how the department could use those technologies in ways the public would be more likely to support. And their hope was to use that information to engage the public, to find out what concerns they might have, and to try to address them. So we pulled together a nationally representative set of about 2,800 Americans. And in doing so, we took advantage of RAND's data collection capability called the American Life Panel. And that's a great capability that lets us quickly ask people who are standing by, ready to answer questions on really a variety of topics. So we asked them a series of questions, some of which you see here. And we asked them about 4 different AI-related technologies: risk prediction algorithms, license plate reader technology, cell phone location data, and facial recognition technologies, what we're calling FRT. So we'll focus a little bit more on FRT today, since that's a little more salient to a lot of us, but we'll also say a bit more about the others as well. So you can see some of the questions that we have, that we asked some of these respondents, like what are the circumstances that, where you would support government use of facial recognition? Are there requirements that you think the government should meet when using facial recognition? And how much do you trust the government's use of facial recognition? And what about DHS's use? And then what would make you more comfortable with all of that? And then we also asked about all the technologies, what kinds of applications or uses of that technology would you support? And the outcome we were hoping for, that we intended here, was that DHS, at the end of all this, would have a systematic way to identify and then prioritize technologies where it's really important to understand the public's attitudes, like what might be controversial. And then we've also been working to help DHS understand what public perception methodologies should be used for different purposes. So these are things like surveys, analyzing existing data sets, focus groups, things like that. And that's because there are a lot of ways to get insight into people's attitudes and beliefs, and they all have different benefits, different drawbacks, efficiencies, and costs. So, you can just ask those people directly, either one-on-one or in groups, and you can do so in an totally unstructured way or semi-structured, which means that you might have predetermined questions, like I just mentioned, but then you'd allow the conversation to flow and be flexible. Or you could have really structured surveys like the ones like what we did here. And then other approaches involve looking at stuff that's already out there. So that would be things like what people have written online, or other texts like in books and journals, images, also looking at what people do, for example, what they might search for. And so one important thing to note about this survey was that the content was finalized in 2020. And what that means is we weren't able to ask about some of the more current AI technologies like ChatGPT, which really just burst onto the scene a couple of years ago, or about more current DHS use cases and policies. So what do we find? First, trust in government to use facial recognition is pretty low. Less than a quarter of respondents said they trusted the US government's use, and that's the blue bar you see there on the left. For DHS, it was a little bit higher, closer to 30%. But what's also interesting here is the orange bars. And that's because over a third of respondents, which would translate to significant numbers of Americans, hadn't really decided whether they thought the benefits of government use of facial recognition outweighed the risks. And the reason that's important is because it means they're persuadable. By showing them that, say, AI uses for Homeland Security are going to be used in certain ways that they're comfortable with, that the rollout seems effective and efficient, that there might be appropriate human oversight, they might support it more. And we'll come back to that point when we talk about recommendations. Another important factor we asked about were the safeguards surrounding the use of technology. So we asked people here if there should be opportunities to, for example, opt out of using the technology. And that's something you'll see now at the airport, where you can request a separate inspection as opposed to going through facial recognition or through the body scanners. We also asked other things like if there should be regular audits of the technology, or if there should be notifications when the technology is being used. And as you'll see, respondents said, yes, there were certain safeguards that they definitely wanted, including making sure that government personnel were trained appropriately, that there was transparency about how the technology was going to be used, and that the data would be kept safe. Probably our biggest takeaway from all of this was that Americans cared less about what technology was being used than how it was going to be used. There wasn't much difference that we saw in the patterns of support between the four AI technologies. What we did find was that people seemed to support uses of AI that were more specific and narrow, like solving crimes for facial recognition. You'll see that they supported identifying either suspects or victims of crimes, or about responding to disasters or finding illegal goods using risk prediction. They were much less supportive of broader, more sweeping uses, like to conduct surveillance of protests or of public places like stadiums. Another part of what DHS wanted to understand was not just how much people might support uses of technology or not, but what would help, what would make things better, what would make them more comfortable with using technology. And because that's ultimately the goal, to be able to use technologies in ways that benefit Americans, because if you can't use them, the technology can't help. And it seemed like people valued getting it right over just making things fast or convenient. The top factors that people supported were making sure that things were done securely, accurately, and all while ensuring privacy of one's personal data. Along the same lines, we asked people to consider this hypothetical scenario where we said, you're walking by a government building and there's a sign saying that facial recognition is in use around the building. So we wanted to know what would make you more comfortable in that situation with how the technology is being used. And here there was a bit, lesser support overall of, things that would make them more comfortable. Some of the top things that you see here just hovered around 60%, suggesting people were still a little bit leery in that scenario. But they did seem to want better information and more transparency. We learned a lot by talking to Americans about their views on AI. So how does that translate to actions that would improve public confidence in Homeland Security uses? We developed some recommendations that we're hoping can help DHS or any other organization that's interested in deploying AI. The first is to keep the stakeholders in mind. As you heard from Ben, it's not just the general public. There's lawmakers, industry, advocacy groups, all of whom have influence. And of course, there are specific groups of people who may be more affected. like the traveling public or those who live in a certain area. The government could look to proactively engage people who haven't made up their minds. Also proactively try to identify what are those different kinds of stakeholders' views. Flowing naturally from that is building trust. And this should be really a key component of any outreach and engagement. One thing we heard but didn't mention specifically earlier is that people felt more comfortable when the government used data that it already owned to, say, train AI models or to use as comparisons. And so that would mean driver's license information or terrorism databases, those kinds of things that the government already either has access to, owns, or has authorities to use, as opposed to buying commercially available data or scraping the open web with stuff. Another way to build trust is for various parts of the government to continue partnering efforts with industry, with civil society groups, international governments at different levels, and others. And then it's important to calibrate the approach that one takes to actually deploying AI technologies. As we found, Americans care about what the government is going to do with that technology. So it might be more effective to first find out and then prioritize deploying technology that enjoys more support. Part of that process means knowing how to use those different public perceptions methodologies that I mentioned, and then integrating all of that insight into all parts of technology development, all parts of acquisition processes, to try to make sure that, that those insights can be acted upon in a timely manner. We've said a few times that it's important to understand and to remember that Homeland Security inherently has a lot of different stakeholders who are invested in its success. And that's part of the value that DHS has seen in having RAND provide fact-based evidence based on objective analysis that can help build trust among the public and all those stakeholders. So we've helped brief these findings across DHS, included to some of the components who will be implementing those approaches. This research that we're talking about today and much more like it, all of that's freely available to the public on RAND's website. And hey, that's Ben, and he's testifying in front of Congress on the exact material that you heard from him earlier. DHS itself is making progress with outreach and engagement as it integrates AI into what it does. It was the first federal agency to release a comprehensive plan to do so. And more recently, it released guidance that was based on its collaborations with industry and civil society partners. It's also formed an AI core, which is comprised mainly of industry experts to spread some of that insights across DHS. And it funds startups, including those working on AI and other kinds of technology through the Silicon Valley Innovation Program, SVIP. This is a fast-moving world. The technology constantly advances as innovation continues, and societal needs evolve just as quickly. So going forward, there's plenty of potential to use AI in ways that are either beneficial or harmful or both. And DHS could look to past research as illustrations of what some of these benefits and risks may be. So these are just a few examples of work that RAND has done along these lines. So we assessed risk that AI might not help make it easier for nefarious actors to first figure out how to build biological or chemical weapons and then launch attacks with them. We've also been helping FEMA cope with disaster recovery in Puerto Rico in the wake of Hurricane Maria. For those of us based in RAND's Santa Monica office, we've seen recently firsthand with the LA wildfires just how massive an undertaking it is to provide assistance to people who need it. And so with Puerto Rico, with the hurricane, not only has RAND helped the government save taxpayers billions of dollars by deduplicating potentially overlapping claims, we've also innovated by trying to harness LLMs, meaning large language models and the technologies that underlie ChatGPT, to more efficiently analyze really the mountains of information that are contained in disaster claims. And finally, many people are concerned about AI's potential to amplify catastrophic risks like natural disasters or nuclear war, and we've worked to assess what the societal impacts of those might be. So coming back to this overarching question of AI and how it can be used to benefit Homeland Security, what the risks might be, better understanding as well as mitigating the public concerns about AI is the kind of effort that's critical to undertake because it helps to understand how AI, or really any other emerging technologies, will affect Homeland Security in a really broad range of missions. There will be new threats from AI that DHS and the Homeland Security enterprise has to deal with. But AI can also give DHS new tools and capabilities that can help achieve its missions. Any efforts to deploy new capabilities could benefit and be made more effective by carefully considering what the impacts and potential risks will be. Thank you all for listening, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ben and Doug, for your excellent presentation. And we'll now move to the question and answer section. If you do have a question, please remember to type your question in the Q&A forum. The first question, I believe, goes to Doug. In regards to the public reception research, what percentage of the sample or research population are aware of or know enough about these technologies to form an opinion about them?
So those orange bars I mentioned, that set of people who weren't really sure, that was about a third of our sample, I would say, although it does differ by technology. So, you know, as much as a lot of us hear or think we hear constantly in the news about ChatGPT, you know, you might think that people have formed an opinion one way or the other, that everyone's either, you know, totally on board, you know, for it, or is really concerned about AI, for example, you know, taking their jobs or dooming us all. But as we found, there's still this, yes, about maybe a good quarter or third of the population who isn't really sure what this means for them. It hasn't necessarily heard all the ways in which you know, many of us, you know, have heard about what AI might mean. Along the same lines, you can see here that, you know, we've done similar work for other kinds of emerging technologies like 5G, which is, you know, the new next generation, or now maybe overtaken by 6G of cellular technology. When we asked people about 5G, what they thought about that, what the risks are, what the benefits were, very, very few people, it seemed, had any sense of what 5G meant for them. So I do think that there's a fair number of people for almost any given technology that you hear about that just isn't sure, or that doesn't know enough, or feel like they know enough about it. So I think that's why it's important to, you know, keep in mind when you hear you know, maybe sensationalist headlines, or you know, if you're certain that everyone, you know, has a certain view in mind, you know, you might want to keep in mind that many people just don't.
Thank you for that.
If I may just briefly add a couple of points to Doug's great answer. You know, I think when we're thinking about the context of like DHS deployments of different technologies, yeah, in part what matters is the nature of the technology itself, right? And that can be quite confusing, especially as technology moves quickly, and many of us, including myself, are not technologists per se. But what I think often people might have more well worked out views on is the use case of a technology. And so what do I mean by that? Well, I mean the purpose by which DHS or any government agency might be using a technology. For instance, is this to secure the border? Is this to, you know, arrest violent criminals? Or is it to, for instance, surveil on people exercising their legitimate right to protest, right? You might have different views about those use cases. And similarly, you might have different views about the context in which a technology is deployed. So you might think it's more acceptable to deploy surveillance technology in certain contexts, like, you know, perhaps on the border or at airports, than you do at in public spaces, in parks or at schools or something like this. And so even if many of the public are still coming to terms and trying to understand, again, as me and others are, what these new technologies actually consist of, you know, it's that relationship between the purpose under which a government agency is using it and the context of that use along with the technology. And I would also add the essential safeguards that are associated with that use. And when you start looking at that relation between those different elements, you know, even if you don't understand the technology itself, you might have a more considered view about what you would like to see in terms of safeguards for that entire use case. Yeah, but thanks. That's I think a really important question.
Thank you. Next is sort of an international comparison type question. The British government is known for using CCTV everywhere. Did RAND compare, or does it intend to compare, the results of this survey with findings that might be available from a similar survey in England?
I'll start. We did not specifically compare the results of this survey, although yes, I'd definitely be interested to have a look and see what that means. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm no expert on what's happening in the UK, but I think the tenor of this question is wondering what effect maybe the knowledge among the public or others about this constant surveillance, what that means for their behaviors and their attitudes. And so yeah, I mean, we could take this into a very, wonky social scientist direction about, how easy it is to compare surveys taken, at different times. And so that would be one thing that I think, many people, could do. But yeah, I mean, I think that many of the same issues that we've, heard about and talked about here are the same ones that would come up for really anyone in the surveillance. And then once again, what we heard was that people were much less supportive of that kind of broad surveillance, whether it's AI being used to analyze the CCTV feeds or not. There was really those more narrow, proscribed use cases that seemed to be a lot more popular.
Ben, did you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, I guess just a couple of quick points. I mean, I think this is a really interesting question, and I appreciate the suggestion for perhaps further research going forward. In many cases, one might expect that some of the foundational values between Americans and British citizens are shared. That there's a sort of a shared desire for certain types of privacy and exercise of civil liberties. But it also, I think, suggests differences in how governments operate. So in many cases, the premise of this question is that the British government operates these types of cameras and surveillance. And that might be a little different in the American context, where it's not so much the government often that operates many of the surveillance tools that are leveraged. It's often private sector entities. So for instance, there's data collected about our locations on our mobile phones. And those are private companies that are actually doing that type of surveillance, that are acquiring that data, and then are able to sell it to advertisers, but also sell it to government officials. And this is a case where this might, and some Congress members have suggested there's constitutional concerns with the government purchasing this type of location data. But it is different if it's a private sector entity acquiring it versus a government accessing it directly. And so I think that also complicates some of these international comparisons, and just again suggests I think a need for more in-depth study comparing different public attitudes about these different approaches. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any insight into the demographics of the respondents? For example, the general job sectors, educational level, access to technology, general age groups, to identify and understand drivers for what may be leading to trust, to neutrality, or the lack of trust?
Yeah, so I'd mentioned that one of the main things that are that DHS wanted from the survey was to ensure that it was nationally representative. And what do I mean by that? That I think speaking to the premise of this question, that it reflected the views of Americans as a whole. That we got people from different sectors, from different age groups, other kinds of demographics, to share their views and to provide them. So I mean, and so a lot of the initial effort for setting up this survey was dedicated to just that, to trying to ensure that we had a set of respondents that would accurately reflect the demographics of Americans, so that we could try to see if there were particular demographic factors, as an example, that seem to be drivers of any changes or differences in views. And I will say, Ben should jump in too, that I don't recall any really major or really significant changes according to demographics. There were, some, like, I think maybe younger people, meaning 31 to 40 specifically, as opposed to like maybe older citizens. But there was nothing, I think, that really changed this overall narrative of what we found in terms of who was trusting of government. There are a lot more details in the report that you see there. Ben, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add there.
No, I think you covered it. Thank you.
So our next question is, you mentioned this study was based on data collected in 2020, which coincides with the pandemic and shift to online and remote technologies. What impact, if any, do you anticipate this had on the study? And how do you think responses might differ today?
Not sure. So the contents, yes, was finalized in 2020. I think we fielded it, shortly after that. The pandemic changed attitudes among a whole range of things, and it's tough to say, the extent to which I think AI technology is one of those things. Other research, Rand has done other research on what people's attitudes were about health, for example, and that's something that seems pretty obvious. Was significantly impacted by the debate about vaccines, about trade-offs, about economics and education versus public health. Those are the kinds of attitudes that we might expect to see changes in due to the pandemic. And to Ben's point earlier, if people have views about how AI or other technologies are being used to shape public health or to deliver education or to boost the economy, then we might expect the pandemic to have shifted those views in those ways. Today, I don't know if it's the pandemic so much that would be the big driver or shift in what people think about AI, so much as it is, I think, about the new technologies that have come out. We mentioned ChatGPT a few times, and we're able to ask about that here. Face recognition was, I think, pretty understandable and salient back then. I think people knew about it. But even just taking that as an example, people have been, it's a lot more in use, more at airports, more to unlock people's phones as identification. And I think ChatGPT is the same way. That was a technology that people could really use maybe for the first time on their own and play with it and really get some real value that they could see out of it. Not for everyone, of course, but I would think that huge technological shifts like that would be greater drivers of any changes we might see in attitudes.
And I'll just add a couple of quick comments on this. I mean, yeah, you're right that the survey that we were presenting here is a bit dated and came in that context. But I mean, this to me just suggests a need to do this type of research regularly and often. And I'll note some of the, how the sausage is made. It's actually quite difficult for the government to do these types of surveys regarding the American public. It's quite difficult for them to engage the public in different ways and understand different reactions. And that's because of various restrictive laws that are in place, but also just not necessarily resourcing this type of public perception work as much as it could be. And so to my mind, all this suggests a need to more regularly integrate public perception studies, surveys, focus groups, and the like into how DHS thinks about this overall. And it's not unlike the way a lot of private companies do customer experience focus groups, and they do various types of beta testing, and they try to ensure that their products have human user experience in mind. A lot of times, the government and DHS in particular doesn't necessarily think of it in those terms. And so part of how I see the implications of our research is to try to take some lessons from how the private sector conducts like user engagement surveys and the like, to ensure that the government itself is thinking about that type of experience. And that's a way to improve uptake of these technologies and also bolster trust and the like. And so, that might also, if these are regularly integrated into like how DHS acquires and uses technology, this would be more, current with contemporary technology developments, as if this just was like a regular thing that DHS did all the time. And so that's something that we believe would be, a beneficial step for the government to take going forward. And we think there's lots of researchers that be potentially interested in these types of opportunities.
Thank you. This next question is really about security risk. Can you comment on any collaboration between the U.S. and foreign AI companies and between the U.S. government and foreign governments? What are the security risks?
I mean, I can take a stab at what I think I understand the nature of this question. I mean, a lot of the DHS mission space, especially things like, border security or tracking cargo shipments, requires a fair amount of international collaboration. There's got to be lots of cooperation between DHS agents and, law enforcement agents and others working across the world. And so I think that's actually pretty crucial that they can foster this type of cooperation. I can imagine that this does raise certain risks, but perhaps not indifferent, or different than the risks that are often in place with respect to adversarial interest in what the U.S. government is doing. With respect to foreign AI companies, I have no personal knowledge of that. I mean, from the most part, from what I am aware, that DHS primarily, if not exclusively, contracts with American companies, and so the type of risk that perhaps the question is alluding to, I'm not sure is the case. And American companies still have a pretty robust ecosystem for the most advanced technologies, and so I expect that will still be the case going forward. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to ponder, though.
The next question, I'm curious to what extent public perceptions of AI are distinct from public perception of data privacy more generally. Are people more or less comfortable at the prospect of their information being assessed by AI as opposed to a human being? Sounds like a research question.
Yeah, I was wondering if we had any questions that specifically got at that. And like you said, Michelle, I'm not sure that we do. I'm not sure if we know the difference, or the difference between what people might think about being assessed by AI versus being assessed by a human. One thing we do know is in the body scanner example that Ben provided, people were very concerned about having a human agent or officer viewing, potentially full body images of themselves. And so, I think, at least I'm not aware of research that specifically speaks to what they might think to have this, automatically analyzed. But that would be one thing that would be good to know, that since we know that public perceptions of that body scanner technology were pretty negative in the way that it was implemented, meaning with the human operator, would it be better to have AI analysis do the work? There's other research that I think maybe suggests or speaks to this too. I mean, I think that there's and I'm not sure I'm getting it totally right, but I think if you look at judgments of AI like critiqued work, like students' essays or feedback, things like that, I think that they are different when someone believes that it is AI providing that feedback as opposed to a human. Again, I don't know it well enough to say what those differences are, but I mean, I do think that that research is out there in different ways, and it would be interesting to try to apply it in these cases.
Yeah, I would just briefly add there's been some beginning work in this regard, and I would just flag a report by my colleague Alina Trieger at RAND that looked at the difference between humans and AI decision making. And in general, I do think a lot of civil liberties advocates have noted that when AI is making consequential decisions about housing or healthcare or law enforcement, that those decisions can often be kind of inscrutable. And it's hard to interpret why an AI is making the decisions that it did. And that might be a type of like due process constitutional issue. And that if, for instance, there's a high impact of a decision, it's important that the person affected is able to contest that decision, is able to ask why that decision was made, and to perhaps take issue with it and present evidence that the decision was made in a way that didn't consider the proper evidence or data or the like. And that might be harder with an AI, and thus this might be, suggesting that there's a requirement that you still need humans in the loop, as sometimes said. You still need humans that are responsible for managing the AI decision-making capabilities, and still being in some place the ultimate agent to determine whether a decision was rightfully made or not. I'm not suggesting that's the context in which that has to be true, but certainly a number of civil liberties advocates have made the case that humans need to be in the loop in that way for those types of contestability and due process reasons. But I think it's a really interesting research question. So thanks for that.
Our next question. Providing education for staff on AI literacy is essential to avoid misuse or other AI accidents. However, generative AI, in some people's opinion, most people, I think, is developing rather quickly and sometimes too quickly. And it is not easy to update training programs for the new functions or manage the literacy level among staff if organization's size is enormous. What do you think about this issue?
This is the exact type of challenge that, for example, the military has faced for decades, I think, and that RAND has helped them try to grapple with, which is, meaning you have new technologies coming online, or that could provide beneficial capabilities to people doing various jobs. How do you provide the training that people need to properly use, and as this, I think, question is alluding to, manage those technologies in a way that's not harmful? I think the first question to ask, though, is who actually needs those technologies, and who would benefit from using those technologies? Because it's not necessarily the case that everyone needs to know everything about generative AI, to like from the nuts and bolts of how it works. It may not be the case that anyone even needs to use it at all. So the kinds of things that I know RAND is, the kind of work that RAND has done for parts of the military are trying to do this jobs analysis to say, what are the kinds of jobs that you have that might benefit from this kind of technology, and what kind of training makes sense to deliver the kind of capabilities that you need. And as I'm alluding, not everyone needs that training or that level of training. So presumably in a large organization, you don't need to deliver as much, hopefully. So I think that's the kind of analytic framework that can help an organization try to make those decisions so that they can use that technology in a way that's most beneficial to them, in a way that's cost effective and feasible.
And then this will be probably our final question. Do you think there will be a whiplash effect once people grasp the implications of AI and use cases of AI, which might shift the general public's opinion again?
I'll start. I think the examples that we gave of backlash to government technology programs, they happened. These were instances in which something happened, maybe unexpected, maybe not. And so I think that's always going to be a possibility when you're deploying anything, any new technology, or even just some sort of government policy change or new program. People will have views about it, because mostly, as much as you might try to, you're not necessarily going to be able to anticipate all the potential impacts or the unintended impacts. And so, bringing that back to what we've been suggesting, doing that kind of work in advance is a way to try to make your technology rollouts, generative AI or whatever it is, more effective, by trying to anticipate in advance what that backlash might look like, and then what you might do about it to head it off.
Yeah, I might just add briefly on this. Even though these technologies are new and changing rapidly, we have longstanding American values that are enshrined in the Constitution and that are in some ways technology neutral, right? Elements of our Bill of Rights, our freedom of expression, our right to privacy. These are elements of American life that should be protected no matter the technologies that are used. And the tricky thing is ensuring that we have the right type of safeguards when new technologies come online and are integrated. But I think often we can go back to those, sort of anchor values as sort of the foundation for how we ought to be cautious with respect to new deployments and the types of safeguards and other elements that are needed to ensure that these uses are transparent, that we have accountability, that we have oversight, and protections for civil liberties. So that's how I think of it. It's in a ways like, important to stay abreast of how technology is changing, but also, important to remember that those foundational values still very much apply going forward.
Thank you. On that note, I think it's appropriate that we wrap up here. Thank you both, Ben and Doug, for your excellent presentation today. And if you are not already on our mailing list, please feel free to sign up to the RAND Policy Currents newsletter. And please follow us on our social platform of your desired choice. We are on almost everything. And then we've put links to the important reports that we have completed on this particular topic in the chat box, as well as some other informational documents as well. And we have one last poll question for you. You'll see that poll question pop up in a few minutes. Please feel free to respond to it. Your answers will not be shared with the public today. But thank you all again. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Doug. Have a great afternoon.